Most people think witchcraft happens in the air. They think it only happens in dreams. They believe the greatest spiritual attacks are the strange birds on rooftops, shadows in the night, or terrifying nightmares. But after spending years inside witchcraft before my deliverance, I can tell you this. The deadliest spells are often not flying above your head. They are buried beneath your feet. Some of the most dangerous altars are not in forests. They are not in shrines. They are not in abandoned cemeteries. They are under living rooms, under bedrooms, under shop entrances, under family compounds, under the very houses people proudly dedicate with prayer, without knowing something was planted there first. My name is Grace. That is not the name I was born with, but it is the name I now use because what I'm about to reveal still terrifies me. I was born in Calabar, Cross River State, Nigeria. I grew up in a family that looked ordinary from the outside. My father worked as a building contractor. My mother sold food near Wat Market. We attended church. We sang in choir. We wore nice clothes on Sunday. But there was a secret in my bloodline, a dark inheritance. The women in my mother's lineage were not just women, some were gatekeepers. My initiation began when I was 13 years old, after the death of my aunt Harriet. She was known in our family as the barren one. No husband, no child, quiet. But when she died, women from Akpaboyo came for her burial and everything changed. At midnight after the morning, my grandmother woke me. She did not speak loudly. She simply said, "Today, your eyes will open." She took me behind my late aunt's house, where an old unfinished bungalow stood. The moon was bright. There were 5 women there, one from Odupani, one from Uyo, one from Ekom, two I had never seen before. On the ground was a calabash. Inside it were sand, blood, broken glass, feathers, and something I later discovered was human hair. Then I saw a small mirror, not ordinary, darkened, treated, covered in oil. That night, I learned the first law of territorial witchcraft. If you want to fight a person for one night, visit them in dreams. If you want to fight them for one season, attack their body. But if you want to fight them for generations, bury something where they stand. That was how I entered into what they called foundation work. I was taught that a building is not just physical. Every house has spiritual gates. Every land has legal access points. Every foundation can either protect or imprison. And once something is buried legally through ritual, many victims can pray for years without understanding why nothing changes. Because some prayers fight symptoms, but foundations fight ownership. This is why some people move into beautiful houses and suddenly everything collapses. A man gets promoted, moves into his dream home, and within a year loses his job. A woman finally marries, enter her husband's compound, and strange miscarriages begin. A business owner opens a new shop, but money disappears faster than it comes. People blame village witches. Sometimes it is deeper than that. Sometimes the battle is under the property itself. because what many people call home can secretly be an altar. I know because I buried those things myself. For 7 years, I worked under senior witches who specialized in grounding destinies through land and buildings. Not everyone in witchcraft does this. This was a higher operation, more technical, more dangerous. We targeted new houses, inherited family land, wedding homes, church buildings, business spaces, and especially properties built without spiritual discernment. You may ask, how can something buried in concrete still affect a person? Because in the spirit realm, the physical object is often not the power itself. It is the legal anchor, like a padlock, like a covenant signature, like an access code. And once it is platted with invocation, it creates a spiritual coordinate. Even if you renovate, even if you move, even if ties are changed, if the covenant is not broken, the spiritual claim can still speak. That is why we used to laugh when families painted houses, changed furniture, bought generators, or upgraded gates, but never addressed the ground. Because a decorated prison is still a prison. And today, I am going to tell you exactly what we buried. The three most dangerous objects I personally helped plant in foundations. Things designed to stop marriages, delay helpers, scatter finances, monitor families, and in some cases, slowly feed on an entire bloodline. Some were buried before concrete was poured. Some were hidden during renovations. Some were planted through gifts given to landlords. Because sometimes the person destroying a house is not outside. Sometimes they were invited in. So listen carefully, because by the end of this confession, you may understand why certain battles in your life feel older than you. Why some homes feel heavy, no matter how much worship happens there. And why some people seem to rise, only to always fall back to the same level. Because there are things buried in foundations, things most people never suspect, things designed so you would never rise again. After my initiation, I thought witchcraft was mostly about appearing in dreams, causing sickness, sending fear. That is what movies show. That is what most people imagine. But when I entered deeper in ranks, I discovered there were dimensions of darkness that were far more calculated. In Calabar, I was eventually handed over to a woman called Mama Effion. She lived near Atimbo Road in a large old house hidden behind rusted gates. To neighbors, she was a widow who sold herbs. To politicians, businessmen, desperate couples, and secret society men, she was something else. She was what we called a groundkeeper. She specialized in land, foundations, property covenants, territorial bondage. I was 16 when I followed her on my first assignment. A man in Ikot Answer had just completed a beautiful duplex. He was a transporter who had returned from Port Harcourt with wealth. He dedicated the house publicly. Pastors came, music played, cows were killed, guests celebrated. But behind the celebration was envy. His elder brother believed he had become too great. So he came to Mama Effion. His request was simple. Let him live there, but let nothing prosper inside. That was the first time I learned a terrifying spiritual principle. A person can own a house physically and still lose it spiritually. 3 nights before the final flooring was completed, we entered the property through a back fence with the help of a compromised laborer. That laborer was paid. This is important because many spiritual attacks do not happen through magic alone. They often happen through access, consent, invitation, compromise. When we entered, Mama Effiong said something I will never forget. Before people sleep in a house, something else can be invited first. She then explained spiritual grounding. She said every building is like a body. The roof is the head. The doors are gates. The windows are eyes. But the foundation is the covenant. If you control the covenant, you can influence everything built on top of it. Just like an electrical system needs grounding to carry current, certain dark covenants need physical grounding to maintain long-term operation. Without grounding, many attacks fade, but with grounding, they can last decades. This is why some people experience battles that seem inherited by every child born in a house. Children fail the same way their parents failed. Marriages break in patterns. Businesses collapse in cycles. Deaths repeat. It is not always because the building itself is evil. Sometimes something was planted there to enforce continuity. That night it's a naked answer. We buried 3 things. At the time, I did not fully understand them. Later, I became the one preparing them. And what shocks me now is that many victims never physically discover them, not because they are impossible to remove, but because many were many were hidden in ways no normal person would think to search. Inside pillars, beneath entrance steps, under master bedrooms, at compound corners, inside sockaway edges, near gates, and sometimes mixed directly into concrete. This is why senior witches called it the silent architecture. A house can be beautiful, painted, furnished, dedicated, even prayed over casually, and still carry a hidden voice underneath. People often ask, if I move away, am I free? Not always, because some foundational rituals are not just tied to building, they are tied to names, bloodlines, dedications. If your name, your child's clothes, your photograph, your hair, or personal items was used in the ritual, then the land becomes a legal witness. It acts like a spiritual coordinate. That is why some people relocate from Nigeria to the UK, Canada, or South Africa. Yes, strange patterns continue because distance does not always break legality. This was why Mama Effiong used to say, never just run from an altar. First know whether it knows your name. And that statement haunted me. I remember one woman in Akim whose husband built a shop plaza. Every tenant in shop number 3 failed. Different businesses, same result. Pharmacy, boutique, POS center, provision store, all collapsed. Eventually, one pastor was invited. During prayer, he kept standing in one corner. He later demanded they break part of the floor. Hidden beneath was a wrapped object containing feathers, red cloth, market dust, and bone fragments. The landlord nearly fainted because that exact corner had been blessed years earlier by a family uncle during construction. Blessed. That is how deception works. Not every ritual looks evil when it is introduced. Some arrive disguised as tradition, protection, family custom, cultural preservation. But spiritually, intent matters. By then, I had become deeply involved. I was no longer just watching, I was preparing rituals. I was learning chants. I was assigned to gather materials. And soon, I would understand the three primary objects we buried most. The ones specifically chosen because they did not just attack people, they grounded destinies. The first was for monitoring, the second was for stagnation, the third, the third was for living sacrifice. And when I explain them, some of you may finally understand why certain homes feel like they are watching you. The first object we buried most often was not a skull, not blood, not bones. That is what many people expect. But some of the most dangerous tools in witchcraft are ordinary looking objects corrupted for spiritual surveillance. The first was the mirror of monitoring. Sometimes it was a full small mirror, sometimes just a shard, sometimes the broken piece of a woman's dressing mirror, sometimes taken from an abandoned saloon. But once prepared, it became something else entirely. I remember the first time I helped prepare one. It was in 2007. A woman from Eket came to Mama Effion crying. Her younger sister had married a wealthy oil contractor and moved into a new home in Federal Housing Estate, Calabar. Outwardly, she came seeking family peace, but in truth, jealousy was eating her alive. She said, since she entered that marriage, everyone respects her more than me. Even my own children now compare me to her. Jealousy is one of witchcraft's easiest doors. When hatred matures long enough, some people stop wanting to rise. They only want others brought down. Mama Effion accepted the case. For 3 days, the woman was instructed to secretly bring personal access points, a strand of her sister's hair from a comb, the color of the master bedroom curtains, a piece of used wrapper cloth from a visit, and soil from the front of the new house. When all was gathered, Mama Effiong took out a circular mirror no wider than a powder compact. Then the ritual began. Palm oil, ground charcoal, alligator pepper, incantations, names, blood from a pigeon. The mirror was not worshipped, it was programmed. This is something many people misunderstand. In dark spiritual systems, objects are often used as legal technologies. They become portals of agreement. The mirror's assignment was singular: observation, access, monitoring. Mama Effiong called it the eye beneath. She said, when buried properly, the house will always report. At the time, I did not understand fully. Later, I saw it. Once planted, usually near the entrance, master bedroom foundation, or central support column, the mirror served as a spiritual lens, not like a camera in the physical sense, but like an access point. Dream inversions became easier. Domestic tension could be tracked. Pregnancy could be monitored. Visitors could be identified spiritually. Prayer intensity inside the home could even be resisted because surveillance shortens reaction time. Do you understand what I am saying? Many attacks are not random, some are responsive. They react because something is reporting. That night, we entered the woman's sister's property through a gate man who had been bribed. That night, we entered the woman's sister's property through a gate man who had been bribed. He believed he was helping bury protection medicine. He did not know that it is another painful truth. Many foundational attacks are planted through deception. Workers, security men, family elders, bricklayers, traditional blessing ceremonies. Not everyone involved knows what they are participating in. The mirror was wrapped in black cloths and inserted near a side pillar before final plastering. The woman moved in officially 2 weeks later. At first, nothing happened. That is how these operations work. Silence builds confidence, then patterns begin. She started saying she felt watched while bathing. Her husband suddenly became suspicious without cause. Private arguments increased. Her first pregnancy ended mysteriously after repeated dreams of broken glass. Visitors who genuinely cared for her gradually stopped coming. And the cruelest part, from outside, her life looked like it was successful. Beautiful house, good husband, cars. But inside, peace was leaking. That is how monitoring altars often function. Not always instant destruction, sometimes gradual destabilization. Because some kingdoms prefer slow erosion over sudden chaos. A destroyed person may seek urgent help. A confused person often blames themselves, and confusion can keep victims trapped for years. I personally handled at least 11 mirror assignments in Cross River and Akwa Ibom between 2007 and 2011. Some were buried in doorposts, compound gates, children's rooms, kitchen corners, even church land. Yes, church land. Especially when a ministry showed unusual speed of growth. I remember one small prayer ministry near Marian Road. People were receiving testimonies. Crowds were increasing. A political figure who felt threatened sponsored an attack. A political figure who felt threatened sponsored an attack. A treated mirror was planted near the altar foundation during a renovation. Within 1 year, leadership scandals, member division, financial tension, strange immorality accusations, it nearly scattered the ministry. Not because God had left, but because access had been granted. This is why discernment matters more than decoration. Many people pray over cars, pray over phones, pray over businesses, but never seriously pray over land. Never question strange gifts. Never investigate who insisted on handling groundbreaking ceremonies. Never ask why certain relatives aggressively demand involvement in construction. And sometimes that ignorance becomes the invitation. One of the signs of monitoring foundations is unusual spiritual exposure. Repeated dreams of windows, eyes, mirrors, or someone watching. Children talking to unseen presences. Constant self sabotage after sharing good news indoors. Heavy tension, specifically after certain visitors leave. Now, let me be clear. Not every strange event is witchcraft. Fear itself can destroy discernment. But I am confessing what I know exists because I helped build it. The mirror of monitoring was real, and when used, its purpose was simple: to ensure the victim never fully enjoys privacy, peace, or unmonitored progress. But as dangerous as it was not the worst. Because object number two did not just watch people, it slowed them, grounded them, exhausted them. This was what we called the sound of stagnation. If the mirror of monitoring was designed to watch, then the sound of stagnation was designed to stop. This was one of the most common objects we buried because it was subtle, silent, cheap, easy to hide, and devastating over time. Many people imagine witchcraft must always involve dramatic rituals, but some of the darkest operations use simple things. When those things are spiritually assigned, sound was one of them. Not ordinary sound, specific sound, chosen sound, directed sound. I was taught there were three primary sources depending on the assignment: graveyard sound, to connect progress with death, burial, or repeated endings; market sound, especially from crowded, trampled places, to symbolize endless activity without meaningful advancement; crossroads sound, to create confusion, delay, and secular patterns. But the most dangerous was when sound was mixed with personal identity markers: hair, nail clippings, photograph ash, underwear threads; hair, nail clippings, photograph ash, underwear threads, baby clothes, menstrual cloth, handwriting. Because once identity was attached, stagnation became more personalized. It was no longer just bad luck, it became targeted grounding. Mama Effion called it destiny weight. I will never forget my first direct assignment involving it. It was for a young man named Tunde. He lived in Lekki, Lagos, though his family house was in Ikon, Cross River. He was brilliant, scholarship student, first class engineering graduate. By all natural standards, he should have risen quickly. But someone in his extended family believed his rising would erase others. So his own uncle, his father's elder cousin, came secretly for help. His request was chilling: let him work hard, but let his efforts never match his results. Do you hear the wickedness? Not death, not sickness, just frustration. Because some people know prolonged frustration can break a person more slowly than tragedy. This assignment required market sound, not from just anywhere, from Wat Market, Calabar, a place of buying, selling, shouting, movement. Mama Effion said, he will always move, but movement will not become arrival. The sound was gathered before dawn from beneath heavily trafficked stores. Then it was mixed with sounds from an old school uniform shirt stolen from his mother's house. Then it was mixed with strands from an old school uniform shirt stolen from his mother's house. His name was invoked repeatedly, not shouted, whispered. That is another thing I learned. Some of the deepest cases are whispered because legality does not require volume. only agreement. The mixture was placed inside a small bottle, wrapped with thread, and buried near the entrance of his father's compound, where he returned each Christmas. That part is important, not his Lagos apartment, his family route, because certain attacks work best from ancestral coordinates. And over the next 8 years, I watched. This man got opportunities but lost them strangely. Visa approved, then cancelled. Job interview successful, position withdrawn. Business partnerships began, then collapsed. Relationships advanced, then scattered before marriage. He was never lazy, never unserious. In fact, his greatest pain was that efforts never translated. He became what we called a moving prisoner, always active, never arising, always active, never arriving. That is what stagnation altars often produce. Not obvious failure, but exhausting near success. The kind that makes people question themselves, pray harder, fast longer, attend conferences, yet remain trapped in invisible repetition. And because there are occasional small wins, many victims do not immediately suspect deeper warfare. They think, maybe next year, maybe I need one more degree, maybe this is normal. Meanwhile, the pattern is engineered. I personally prepared stagnation sand for a woman whose marriage introductions kept collapsing mysteriously. A businessman whose shops attracted customers but never profit. A pastor whose ministry drew crowds but no stability. A nurse who relocated abroad, whose documents repeatedly disappeared at final stages. Different lives, same pattern. Motion without establishment. And this was why witches favored this object, because stagnation often looks natural. People rarely suspect sabotage when someone simply isn't progressing. Society may call them careless. Spiritually, some are burdened. One of the darkest cases happened in New York. A mother, jealous of her daughter's beauty and favor, brought sand mixed with her daughter's childhood hair to stop every marriage proposal. I was there when it was buried near a backyard mango tree. By age 42, that woman had experienced 7 broken engagements. 7. Beautiful, educated, prayerful. Yet every serious relationship collapsed near completion. Do you understand the wickedness? Some foundational attacks are not trying to kill you, they are trying to outlast your hope. And hopelessness is often a greater spiritual weapon than pain. Now, here is where many people miss it. Stagnation sand did not always have to be buried under concrete. Sometimes it was planted at gates, flower beds, under doormats, cornerstone, backyard shrines, potted plants gifted during housewarming ceremonies. Yes, even decorative gifts. That is why spiritual ignorance can be expensive. Again, this is not a call to paranoia. Not every setback is a buried object. Life itself has struggles. But I am exposing what I personally participated in. Some patterns are engineered. And one of the signs is persistent, unnatural repetition, despite genuine wisdom, effort, and prayer. Especially when a person's life seems spiritually heavy in one location, but temporarily improves elsewhere because sometimes the ground itself is speaking. But as terrible as the stand, but as terrible as the sound of stagnation was, there was something worse, far worse. The third object was feared even among junior witches because this one was not just for watching, not just for delaying, it was for feeding. It created what we called a living altar, and once activated, your tears, losses, and suffering could become maintenance for the covenant itself. Of all the things we buried, this was the one I feared most. Even before my deliverance, even while I was still deep inside darkness, this object disturbed me. Because unlike the mirror of monitoring, which watched, or the sound of stagnation, which slowed, the animal heart or bone was different. This one was built to feed, to remain active, to create continuity, to become what senior which is called a living altar. And when I say living, I do not mean physically alive, I mean spiritually sustained. A system designed to keep drawing power from repeated human suffering, financial loss, miscarriage, addiction, family division, accidents, barrenness, depression, constant tears. This was not random warfare, this was maintenance. The first time I witnessed this ritual was in Abbey local government area, Cross River State. I was 19. By then, I had already proven loyalty and was being introduced to deeper assignments. A wealthy cocoa merchant wanted protection over his wealth, but protection in darkness often comes with exchange. He was not asking for blessing, he was negotiating preservation. His fear was simple. My brothers must never control what I built. So instead of seeking peace, he chose domination. The ritual happened on family land where he was constructing a mansion. To everyone outside, it looked like success. Truckloads of cement, imported roofing sheets, massive gates. But at midnight, before the central foundation slab was completed, something else was laid first. A goat was slaughtered, not for food. Its heart was removed immediately, still warm. I remember because Mama Effion forced me to hold the calabash. There were chants, invocations, blood mixed with herbs, and then something I can never forget. The man's own name, his wife's name, and the names of his children were spoken over that heart. That is what made it legal. That is what transformed the ritual from symbolism into covenant. Then the heart was buried beneath what would become the master bedroom. Mama Effion said, as this heart once beat, so shall this altar continue to breathe through this house. Do you understand? The animal was the substitute anchor. Its life became symbolic infrastructure. And from that point, the house itself became spiritually transactional. What fed it? Struggle. Every major conflict strengthened his voice. Every betrayal, every financial battle, every bloodshed, every sorrow. In some cases, prosperity came, but at a hidden cost. That merchant became wealthier, massively wealthier. New contracts, political favor, expansion. But within 11 years, one son became a drug addict. One daughter had repeated miscarriages. His wife developed mental instability. Three brothers entered bitter land disputes, and eventually, his eldest son died in a car crash 2 streets from the compound. Outwardly, the family was rich, but inwardly, the altar was feeding. This is why I need people to understand. Not every successful foundation is peaceful. Some structures rise because something was exchanged, and dark altars always collect, sometimes from the builder, sometimes from children, sometimes from bloodlines, sometimes from future generations who know nothing about the original covenant. That is why some families inherit battles they did not start, because spiritually, inheritance is not always money. Sometimes it is debt. The bone version of this ritual was even darker. Bones, often from dogs, goats, snakes, or birds, of specific ritual value, were buried to create territorial patterns. Dogs for confusion or aggression, snakes for stealth, fear, and seduction, bird bones for spiritual access or wandering, goat bones for repeated sacrifice. These were not random superstitions. Inside witchcraft systems, symbolism directs assignment. And once buried under thresholds, gates, or bedroom corners, they could function as repeating legal witnesses. I once assisted in a case in Oron, Akwa Ibom, where a family kept experiencing strange cycles. Every first son either abandoned home, became addicted, or died early, generation after generation. When one prayer ministry finally intervened, an old animal bone bundle was discovered near the original ancestral gatepost during reconstruction. An elder later confessed it had been buried decades earlier to protect lineage authority. Protect, again, deception. Many destructive covenants are introduced under language that sounds beneficial: protection, preservation, heritage, control, honor. Meanwhile, spiritual bondage. That is why discernment matters, because darkness rarely introduces itself honestly. Now, here is what made living altars especially dangerous. They often adapted. If one area of suffering reduced, another intensified. A family might finally solve financial issues, then experience marriage destruction or health crisis or child rebellion, because the altar's objective was not always one specific tragedy. Its deeper assignment was sustained legal access. This is why some households feel like there is always something, always one emergency, always one crisis, always one draining issue after another. And over time, exhaustion becomes normal. Victims stop asking, "Why is this happening?" They start saying, "This is just our family." No. Sometimes it is not just family. Sometimes something is feeding. I remember my breaking point. A woman in Ogoja brought a case against her own younger sister because she believed her sister's children were too favored. The assignment involved a chicken heart ritual planted near a shared inherited compound wall. But one of the children, an 8-year-old boy, began screaming at night that someone under the ground keeps calling me. That sentence shattered me, because for the first time, I stopped seeing assignments. I started seeing casualties, real children, real families, real pain. and for weeks I could not sleep because beneath all our chants and rituals were people, human beings, lives, destinies. That was when fear began growing inside me. Not fear of witches, fear of judgment, because I realized something horrifying. Some things buried in foundations are not just hidden physically, they are testifying spiritually. And one day, everything buried speaks. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming every spiritual attack looks dramatic. Sometimes there are no moving objects, no sudden apparitions, no obvious nightmares, no Hollywood style manifestation. Sometimes the deepest foundational bondage is quiet, calculated, and patient. Its purpose is not always to scare you, its purpose is to normalize oppression. That is how many victims remain trapped for years. That is how many victims remain trapped for years. Because when warfare becomes routine, people stop identifying it as warfare. During my years in darkness, we were taught something chilling. If they notice too quickly, they will fight. If they adjust, they will live inside it. So many foundational attacks were designed to feel like bad luck, family pattern, or just life. But there were signs, repeated signs, patterns that often revealed when land, property, or a home had become spiritually manipulated. Again, not every strange event is witchcraft. Wisdom matters, discernment matters, but I am exposing recurring patterns I personally witnessed around compromised grounds. Sign 1: unexplained heavy spores or atmospheric zones. There were homes we targeted where one corner of the house always felt wrong. A particular room, a section of the compound, a staircase landing, a backyard edge. People describe it differently. This room feels colder. I don't like standing there. My child keeps staring at that corner. I feel watched near this wall. Sometimes guests sensed it before owners did. Some avoided sleeping in certain rooms without understanding why. In one house in Southlight Town, Calabar, a woman repeatedly changed furniture in her bedroom because she felt restless only on one side of the room. Unknown to her, a ritual object had been buried beneath that support beam during renovation. The ground can carry memory, and certain spiritual operations create pressure zones, not always visible but often sensed. Sign 2: chronic financial leakage. This was one of the biggest indicators. Money enters but refuses to stay. Not occasional bills, not normal responsibilities. I mean repetitive strain drainage, unexpected emergencies, broken appliances, medical crises, legal issues, robbery, bad investments, sudden repairs, repeated theft. It is like income arrives with holes attached. We call this feeding, especially in living altar cases, because the assignment was not always poverty. Sometimes it was perpetual consumption. You work, you earn, you strive, but something always devil. I remember a businessman in New York whose electronics store prospered publicly. Yet every major profit cycle was followed by bizarre losses, fire, court cases, shipment destruction, family sickness. For years, he thought he was unlucky. He did not realize his shop land had been spiritually tied to a foundational drain. Sign 3: persistent strange dreams linked to the home. Dreams are not always spiritual, but certain patterns raise alarms in our circles. Repeated dreams of digging, sand, dead animals, mirrors, unknown visitors entering the house, people calling from beneath the ground, flooded rooms, snakes near foundations, broken floors, locked rooms. When these dreams became repetitive, specifically around a property, senior witches often interpreted it as spiritual friction. Sometimes, victims were sensing what their minds could not consciously explain. I once watched a woman in Akpaboyo repeatedly dream of sweeping dirt from under her bed, only to later discover ritual items hidden during construction by an embittered relative. Sign 4. Unnatural avoidance of home. This one surprises many people. Some compromised home produce emotional or psychological resistance. People suddenly prefer staying away. Constant travel, late nights, restlessness, children refusing certain roles, marital tension intensifying mostly at home but easing elsewhere. In some cases, people unknowingly spend years emotionally displaced from spaces they legally own because peace has been contested there. Sign 5. Generational patterns tied to a specific property. This was perhaps the clearest sign. Every person who occupied the same master bedroom suffers similar issues. Every firstborn on that land faces repeated failure. Every marriage inside that compound collapses. Every business built there crashes. Patterns tied more to place than personality. This is critical because when suffering becomes geographically consistent, wise people investigate deeper. I remember a compound in Ekote Ekpene where three different women married into the same family house over 22 years. All three experienced miscarriages in the same room, different women, different personalities, same location. Later, prayer ministers discovered old ritual material buried near that room's original foundational trench. Sign 6. Constant spiritual resistance to prayer in the home. Constant spiritual resistance to prayer in the home. This one terrified me most after my deliverance. Some people can pray powerfully elsewhere, church, prayer mountain, vigil, but inside their own home, sleep overwhelms them, confusion increases, distraction intensifies, heaviness grows, arguments erupt before prayer. This was often intentional in targeted homes because a spiritually oppressed house often resists eviction. Why? Because prayer threatens illegal occupancy. Darkness rarely panics when ignored, it reacts when challenged. The most dangerous sign: normalized suffering. This is what senior witches preferred, not panic, adaptation. When a family begins saying, "In our family, marriage is hard. In this house, sickness is normal. Men here don't last. We always struggle. That's how things are." That acceptance can become psychological reinforcement. And once oppression becomes identity, resistance weakens. That is why I am speaking, because many people are fighting symptoms without questioning foundations. Again, this is not about fear. Fear gives darkness free rent. This is about awareness, because what is hidden often survives through ignorance. And my greatest regret is how many years I help people remain ignorant. But my deliverance taught me something stronger. What was buried illegally can be uprooted legally, not always by digging physically, but by confronting the covenant spiritually. Because the greatest mistake darkness makes is assuming Jesus cannot enter what humans buried. And in the next part, I will tell you exactly what began destroying everything I once helped plant, the midnight decree. When I first began noticing the damage we caused, I did not immediately leave. That is something many people misunderstand about people trapped in darkness. Exposure does not always produce instant escape. Sometimes, truth first produces torment. I was already deep inside. I had participated. I had assisted. I had benefited. I knew names. I knew rituals. I knew burial points. I knew chants. And the deeper fear was this: what happens when a person who helped build altars wants to walk away? Because in witchcraft, departure is often treated like betrayal, and betrayal is punished. For nearly 2 years, I lived divided, outwardly obedient, internally cracking. I still attended assignments, but something had changed. Faces stayed in my mind: children, mothers, homes, marriages. I could no longer look at foundation the same way. I started hearing scripture differently too. Though I had been raised around church, I had never understood spiritual legality the way I did after entering darkness. Then one night, everything changed. It happened in 2012. A case from Port Harcourt. A woman was building a new duplex for her family in Eliozu after years of hardship. Unknown to her, her husband's uncle wanted that house spiritually claimed. We were assigned to plan stagnation and monitoring objects before final dedication. I traveled with two senior women, but when we arrived near the property, something strange happened. At exactly past midnight, I heard prayer, not ordinary prayer, violent prayer. The woman's mother had come from Enugu and was walking the unfinished compound alone, barefoot, holding olive oil and her Bible. She was declaring loudly, "Every plant my heavenly Father had not planted shall be uprooted." Again and again and again, she moved corner to corner, front gate, back wall, foundation edges, bedrooms, kitchen, calling on Jesus. At first, I laughed nervously because I had seen prayer before, but this felt different. Then she read, "If the foundation be destroyed, what can the righteous do?" Psalm 11 verse 3. And immediately answered with Matthew chapter 15 verse 13. "Every plant which my heavenly Father had not planted shall be uprooted." Do you understand what happened? For the first time, I saw someone address both the problem and the legal solution. She was not merely praying against witches, she was confronting foundational legality. And suddenly, one of the women beside me screamed. She dropped the ritual package. The other began shaking. I cannot explain this to skeptics the way they want me, but I know what I witnessed. Some prayers do not merely comfort people. Some prayers issue eviction notices. That night, we could not enter that property. Every attempt felt resisted, heavy, blunt. I ran, physically ran, and for weeks afterward, I was tormented by dreams not of witches, but of foundations opening, buried objects surfacing, voices saying, everything hidden will answer. That was the beginning of my collapse and eventually my deliverance. I found myself months later in a prayer ministry in Lagos near Iyanapaja, not because I was holy, because I was terrified. For 9 nights, I confessed things I had never told anyone, locations, assignments, burials, names, methods. And there, a pastor told me words I will never forget. You do not need a shovel to break every evil foundation. You need legal authority. That changed everything because many people panic thinking, what if I can't dig it up? What if I cannot dig it up? What if the house is rented? What if the land is inherited? What if I do not know where it was buried? Listen carefully. Darkness depends heavily on ignorance and agreement. When legal spiritual authority is invoked through Christ, covenants can be renounced, revoked, and uprooted. This does not mean wisdom is ignored. Sometimes physical action matters too, but spiritual legality must be addressed. I was taught to pray between 12 o'clock a.m. and 3 o'clock a.m., not because God only works then, but because many foundational operations were historically performed during those hours. It was often a direct confrontation window, not superstition, strategic consistency. And this was the decree. Step 1. Stand at the four corners of your home, property, room, or land if possible. If not physically possible, pray by directional representation. Step 2. Anoint with oil, not because oil is magic, but as a symbolic act of consecration. Step 3. Declare scripture legally and specifically. According to Matthew chapter 15, verse 13, every plant my heavenly Father did not plant in this property be rooted off. According to Psalm 24, verse 1, this land belongs to the Lord. I renounce every covenant made knowingly or unknowingly through bloodline, land, gift, ritual, or buried object. I issue a deed of release over this property in the name of Jesus. That phrase, deed of release, became deeply personal to me because witchcraft often functions through claim and deliverance often begins with lawful repossession. Why this matters? Some people are fighting furniture when the issue is foundation. Some are changing cities when the issue is covenants. Some are blaming themselves endlessly when something deeper needs confronting. Again, this is not permission for paranoia. Not every hardship is a buried object. Not every struggle is witchcraft. But where spiritual patterns persist unnaturally, wise people pray intelligently. Because what you do not confront can continue. Please hear me. Not every smiling relative is innocent around your rising. Not every gift during building is harmless. Not every traditional rite is spiritually neutral. Discernment is not fear. Discernment is protection. Ask questions. Pray over land. Pray over homes. Pray over renovations. Pray over gifts. Pray over inherited property. Because I once helped bury things people never suspected. And many victims wasted years fighting what was beneath them. But I am also living proof that what was planted can be uprooted. What was buried can be silenced. What was dedicated illegally can be revoked. And what darkness granted, God can still release. So I want to ask you, have you ever felt a strange heaviness in a specific part of your home, a room, a corner, a compound, that prayer alone seemed to keep exposing, but you never understood? Share it below. Because sometimes testimony reveals patterns, and sometimes exposure is where freedom begins. And in the next confession, I will reveal how spiritual monitoring works, how witches use mirrors, dreams, social media, and familiar access points to track destinies long before attacks begin. Because some battles do not start with destruction, they start with surveillance.